welcome to this second part on how to set up a Raspberry Pi to run a DecBC or ZooBC node in it. In the first part we saw how to put together physically the Raspberry Pi, and what we got is this, a small nice box that has some ports and some other ports, and we also prepared the operating system in a micro SD card. We set up the operating system that is adapted to run server-like application for Raspberry Pi. So it has no user interface and is running in a lighter manner. So at this point we have a configuration here. So we have a nice keyboard, a monitor. You can see myself reflected in the monitor with a nice ZooBC t-shirt I'm wearing. And if you want one, write in the comment, we may send you one. We have the Raspberry Pi and we have a few cable and power ports. So first of all, I am connecting the monitor to its power sources. So the monitor has a USB-C power source, so we can plug it in to the USB port. We have the keyboard. The keyboard is USB. So we plug it in with a USB, and oh, so confusing. Here there is a beautiful plastic protection for the keyboard to do safe typing. And we connected the USB from the keyboard to the Raspberry Pi USB port. Okay, now we have to connect the HDMI cable to the HDMI port in the Raspberry Pi. At the same time, we connect the other part of the HDMI cable to the monitor. Last but not least, we need to give power to the Raspberry Pi, and we do so with his power cable. So now the computer, the Raspberry Pi, is gonna boot up, and we're gonna see in this monitor that the things comes alive. Hopefully, it's not dead. Here it is. And we are doing a boot. I did something special for you. I can capture the output of the video, and I'm going to show it in a way that is better for you, so you can see better what happened in the screen. Furthermore, you can see my keyboard here, you can see myself here, and you can see the screen up there. I'm gonna change the resolution of the screen to a low resolution so you can read everything that is appearing over there. Now the resolution by default is high, and it makes it harder to read. Raspberry Pi default installation is set up with a user name Pi, and the password is Raspberry. Obviously, it's better to change them later, but because it is at this moment for educational purposes, we leave them as they are. So it's my moment to log in. Pi, Raspberry, and we need to run a configuration application in order to change the resolution of the screen. We do a sudo in order to gain administrative access, and then the command is Ras Pi -config, and this open this interface. The second option here is display option. The first option in the submenu is resolution, and I choose mode 3 is 720 by 480. I think is going to be good for us. Set the resolution, finish. He asked, do you want to reboot now? And surely we reboot. We're gonna see that now in the reboot the graphic and the text are already at the higher resolution, and it's much easier to read them. There are a few important settings to do, as the Raspberry Pi is just coming out of factory, if you want, because the operating system we created is fresh. This is the first boot that we have done with this operating system. We need to make sure that the layout of the keyboard is correct. We need to make sure that the internet connection is there active, and we are connecting to a Wi-Fi at least. There is also the Ethernet port if we want to connect directly to a router. It is an option. Again, login PI, password is Raspberry, and here we are. At this point, we go back to the same application we had before with sudo Ras Pi -config. And at this moment, we go to the option number 5, localization options. First, the locale, I can set up the configuration that is best for me. You can scroll down with the down arrow. I go for English United States UTF-8. Okay, is the British one selected first. I move to the English US UTF-8. Okay, again here I go to English US UTF-8, and this is going to reset up the locales in the operating system to match. I choose this because most applications use this, because it's the safest one, and also all my keyboard and hardware. But if you have a reason to choose something else, please do so and choose the one that fits you. What is important though is that the keyboard mapping is correct. If the keyboard mapping is not correct, you're gonna go crazy when you type in a password, for example, and it doesn't pass because you think you type something but it's actually not typing what you want. Again, in localization options, the time zone, for example, something important for me is Asia, Singapore. Again, number 5, localization option. Here we have the keyboard. I come back to that later. Another thing is that wireless channels that are allowed for this country, so we need to set these. For example, I take Indonesia for me. At this point, if I go out with finish, scroll down and right, you would like to reboot now? No. I show you something. Let's clear the screen. If I want to do the pipe sign, you know, like when you pipe the result of a command into another, is on this key here. If I try to do the pipe sign, I get tilde or the hash sign. So it means that the keyboard is not correctly configured. If I go where the tilde is, I get some particular character. So I need to map my keyboard properly. For this, I go back to the utility, I go to the localization option again, and I go to keyboard. At this point, I can choose, this is the best for me, the 105 key PC International, but there are a lot of other mapping that are setting for specific keyboard. There are brands like Logitech, there is Apple keyboards. Wherever you are installing this or whatever keyboard you have, you need to choose your own. I choose for me English US, and as English US, I go to the standard. I don't use Dvorak or other kind of format keyboard, but I go to the standard one. I here also accept what standard comes up, and at this point, I can see that when I go out, if I try to do the pipe character, I get my pipe character, which is important. At this point, we reboot with the command reboot, and we make sure that at the restart, the Raspberry Pi load all the new settings. And what we need to worry about now is to see which is the Wi-Fi, which are the Wi-Fi that are available, and connected to the correct one. So I give you a direct example on how to look at all the available Wi-Fi and then to connect to one. So login is PI, password is Raspberry. Now the command to run is IW list. So this lists all the Wi-Fi available from the LAN 0 is the Wi-Fi of the Raspberry Pi, the command is scan. Then I can pipe, because now my keyboard does the pipe, to grep the filters the result for ESSID, so only the ESSID are gonna show up. Is showing nothing means that we need to start up the Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi. We go back to our command, go configure system setting, we enter SSID and passphrase. As you see here, I don't have any option to see the list of available SSID. So I just put a random character here, and I finish. At this point, when I scan, I'm gonna see the list of the available Wi-Fi. Alright, so I again check the name of the Wi-Fi I want to connect to. I go here in system option, wireless LAN, and at this point alright, now we have another option to set up, that we go in system and it says network at boot. At this point, network at boot, it says, would you like to wait until network connection established? Yes. And then okay. This means that when the Raspberry Pi is booting, before getting started with the node and everything, it makes sure that the Raspberry Pi is connected to the internet. So best option at this point, finish. We reboot, and then at the restart we try to see if the internet connection works. There is a simple trick to see if it works. There is a command, is wget, that allow you to download any page or anything from the internet, and we're gonna try to wget Google, just the homepage of Google, and see if can find it and download it or not. Alright, let's log in with PI, Raspberry, and at this point, let's clear the screen. Let's try wget google.com. Now it managed to get Google, so means that the connection is correct. If I see that there is an index.html there, is the one that I downloaded. At this point means that the Raspberry Pi is connected to the internet. I can try to, for example, go back to the config and do an update to the config system. At this point is connecting properly and downloading all the packages that you need to see what there is to update. Another important setting we have to do to the Raspberry Pi is to go to the interface option, go to the SSH and say yes when he asks you want the SSH server to be enabled. If the SSH server is not enabled, then we cannot connect from remote once we want to leave the Raspberry Pi alone without a keyboard and without a monitor. Alright, the server is enabled, so at this point, once we try to connect to the Raspberry Pi, we can do so. As with the virtual private server that we rented online, we need to do the updates. So apt get update. Alright. Why? Because I need to do sudo apt-get update, and it works. Always remember, we are now in a root user in here, So we want to then enable the Raspberry Pi to let us access as root with SSH keys, as we did with the server that we rented, or we prefer to run as a normal user and use the sudo command, or run as a root, just escalating after entering as a Pi username. This is options that we have. I prefer to set it exactly like the servers we rented, so that we have no difference in how things are set up and organized. At this point, we do the upgrade. And it's done. Now there is something to say. Let's say you want to leave the Raspberry Pi alone without keyboard and monitor and only access it from outside. We need to make sure that it has a fixed IP address. To do this, we need to edit a file. We use pico etc dacp cd-conf, and here we can see that there are already some settings, but we should just add at the bottom something like static :0, static IP address equal, and now we need to see which is the IP address that we've been assigned. Probably we want to keep the one. Static routers, also we want to assign, and then last static domain name server, and then we go for this. So how to check the current configuration? Let's go out and save this. We made a configuration, and now we reboot to test if this configuration works. Means after the reboot is still connected to the internet. After that, the two things to set are the SSH key that are allowed to connect, and change the settings that allow root to connect without password, means with the SSH keys. And we managed to download the Bing page, means we are connected to the internet, means that the settings are correct, and theoretically now we are fixed on their IP addresses so that we can access it from outside. Let's delete this. One system to go in the root account is to do sudo su. So here we automatically become root. We see where root has his home. Okay, is now in the home directory. Usually is here. Root, okay. And here we need to have a couple of important things. One is a directory SSH. So the things to do now is to configure the file. Same one that we used to do in the VPS. So it's in etc ssh config. So in this file we can search as Ctrl W to search. Permit root login, and this was without password. We had other parameter to set up to keep the connection stable if we want. Keep alive, current alive. All right. At the same time, now we need to authorize our key. So to download the key from the web, I save the key in my website in the directory. So I simply go get so we have the file authorized key. If we look inside it, we see that there are two RSA keys. At this point, it should be possible to connect to this Raspberry Pi from the local network, going to the address 192.168.100.129. Should we make a test? I'm gonna move myself to the other computer and try. Now at my computer, I left the Raspberry Pi there, and I'm gonna try to remote connect to the Raspberry Pi to see if our configuration works. If it works, I will be able to then shut it down and then reboot it with no keyboard and no monitor all on, and it's gonna be always reachable from remote with SSH to become exactly like one of the servers that we rented from Linode and DigitalOcean. So now, moment of the truth, let's try. I try SSH. My private key already being set up inside the Raspberry Pi, so automatically I should be able to connect to the server. Let's see. Root at, now is in a local network, so 192.168.100.129. Okay. Yes, it doesn't recognize the server because the first time I'm connecting, so I say yes. And I am root a Raspberry Pi, which is pretty cool. Let's see if the configuration system works from here. Let's say I don't need to do sudo because I'm already root. Ras Pi config. Yes, I have now here the user interface. It says Ras Pi could not determine the full user because this is something usually run from the user Pi. What user should these settings apply to? Anyway, not something we are here to do, but just to test that we are remotely connected to the Raspberry Pi and is acting as a server, exactly like those that we have set up. So at this point, you are set. At this point, I'm gonna show you how to shut down the Raspberry Pi, and then you can run it if you want independently, and you can access and you can go to the next tutorial, how to finally download and install the node. Well, at this point, all we have to do now is to shut down the Raspberry Pi to then reboot it when it's connected independently with no monitor, keyboard and everything else. To do this, we use the command shutdown -H to halt the system, and now to say when to do the shutdown. The Raspberry Pi is off, and we are at this point. We're done with this last part of the setting up the Raspberry Pi. So then all of the system are the same. So we're going to go to the next tutorial, which is downloading and installing the node of ZooBC. And we log in to a remote server. It can be the VPS that you got at Linode, it can be the VPS you got at DigitalOcean, can be your Raspberry Pi, it doesn't matter. Same thing, same everywhere. Thank you for watching and see you at the next tutorial.